All right, today is Chapter 32, Section 1. We're going to talk about how World War II generally begins here. Roman numeral 1 says Germany sparks a new war in Europe. This has been a long time coming out of the Treaty of Versailles. The introduction. Point number 1 is a key term, the Non-Aggression Pact. This is a 10-year agreement between Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union and Adolf Hitler of Germany. This basically means they agree that they would not fight each other. Hitler promised Stalin land, and they agreed to divide Poland once they had each conquered the half that they were responsible for. Germany also agreed that the USSR could take over Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Capital letter B, Germany's lightning attack. Hitler then attacked Poland by surprise on September 1st, 1939. After this major move, France and Great Britain now declared war on Germany in response. This was the last straw, and they could no longer practice appeasement. Hitler was after the western half of Poland because of its large German-speaking population, which is part of his Lebensraum concept. The German invasion of Poland was the first use of a new type of German military tactic called Blitzkrieg tactics. This literally means lightning war. It involved the correlation of airplanes and tanks, followed by massive infantry forces. The goal was to move quickly and with great force. Capital letter C on the other side, we're talking about the Soviet attacks. The Soviets moved in to occupy the eastern half of Poland on September 17, 1939. They then took over Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They then attempted to take over Finland, but there they were met with great resistance. Stalin sent in over 1 million troops. Those troops expected a quick victory, and they were not really well prepared for the extreme winter fighting. The Finns were able to defend themselves until the sheer numbers of the Soviets forced them to surrender in 1940. Next, we'll take a look at the fall of France, Roman numeral number 2. Before we get to the actual country of France, we'll take a look at Norway and Denmark. In April of 1940, Hitler attacked Denmark and Norway by surprise. The Germans basically forced both of them to surrender within hours, a mere matter of hours, gentlemen. This was a strategic move for Hitler because he could now build bases on the coast to attack Great Britain from. Capital letter B, France. In May of 1940, Hitler attacked the areas of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. These countries were en route to France. By traveling through a heavy forested region known as the Ardennes, the Germans crossed over the Maginot Line, a system of fortifications along the French and German border, and reached the northern coast of France in only 10 days. Now, capital letter C, the rescue at Dunkirk, I will tell you that there is a famous movie that just came out about a year or two ago called Dunkirk. The Germans, now occupying the French north coast, met up with troops in Belgium and executed what were known as Blitzkrieg tactics on the French. The Allied forces were surrounded and trapped near the city of Lille, and eventually they were pushed back to the port city of Dunkirk, where they were then pushed with their backs to the sea. They had no escape, and they had their backs to the sea on the beaches at Dunkirk. This was a major problem. They have nowhere to go, and they're losing significantly. The British set out to rescue the army by creating a makeshift naval armada, including 850 Navy ships and a host of other seafaring craft. Even fishing ships and yacht boats were sent over to try and save these soldiers. This attempt was able to transport about 338,000 soldiers safely across the English Channel from May 26th to June 4th. But those soldiers who were waiting to be saved endured a lot of trouble. I'm going to try to switch to a video clip from the opening scene of this feature film, Dunkirk. Hopefully this works, guys. Okay, I figured it out. Guys, the propaganda that you're going to see falling from the sky here is actual propaganda. It's basically small leaflets of paper that the Germans dropped from the air, which basically had Dunkirk on a map with red arrows showing the German forces surrounding the English and French forces there, saying, "We have you surrounded, surrender." And they dropped thousands of these. Pretty accurate portrayal in this film. Here we go. Please enjoy. You can see that it's just littered with these propaganda all over the place. So he's English, and those are French troops. Okay, they control this town, and the English and French were fighting together on the same side against the Germans.
Okay, bon voyage.
And this is what the beaches would have looked like. Just thousands of troops waiting there. They were sitting ducks for German bombs and German fighter jets. Many lives were lost here. Okay, and we're back. I hope that that clip worked out for you. If you want to see the full film, I do have it in my classroom. I purchased it for my history by Hollywood class, but I mean, you can find it. It's a really good movie. It actually is very entertaining. Next is capital letter D, France falls. By June 14th, the Germans had taken Paris, and French resistance began to crumble. On June 22nd, 1940, the French surrendered, and they had lost the northern part of France, which is where Dunkirk took place. The southern part of France was going to be ruled by a puppet government led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, and the headquarters of the government was located in the city of Vichy. There is an entire historical genre. You could take a college course on what's called Vichy France. So there's a totally different way of ruling and a totally different system, but Philippe Pétain was basically a puppet for Adolf Hitler. Charles de Gaulle was the French general that sort of set up what's called a government in exile in the British capital of London. His goal was someday to reconquer France. He organized a militia called the Free French Military Forces and battled against the Nazis until France was liberated in 1944. While all of this was going on in France, Great Britain was experiencing the Battle of Britain. Your textbook has some pretty good pages, 924 and 928, which show you a lot of the damage that some of these Nazi bombers did to Great Britain. Winston Churchill was the British Prime Minister. He declared that his nation would never give in to the Nazis. Hitler now turned his attention to Great Britain after having taken over France. His plan was first to take out the RAF, which was the British Royal Air Force. Once he was able to do that, his goal was to then land 250,000 soldiers on the British shores. In the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, began to bomb Great Britain. They targeted British cities such as London, where their goal was actually to take the lives of civilians and thus reduce morale. Two technological devices, though, helped the British detect and defend against German air raids. The first one is radar, which was developed in the 1930s to track the speed and direction of incoming planes. And the second is the Enigma machine. This was created by the Germans to create secret military codes. And actually, though, a complete German Enigma machine was smuggled into Britain in the late 1930s. It helped to decode German messages. So the British figured out what the German secret military code was. They utilized the machine to do that. And then they knew when these bombing attempts were going to be happening. The British would then be able to sound alarms, and they would take cover in subways, air raid shelters, or if they didn't have any other option, at least in their basements. So this was all known as the Battle of Britain, the constant bombing and air raiding of British cities and military sites that took place for about 1 year until May 10th, 1941. Eventually, because of the British resilience, Hitler began to call off his attacks because it was very expensive to pay for all of these bombs and all of this fuel to get over to Great Britain. The British were proving under Winston Churchill's leadership to be very resilient to those attacks. Next is Roman numeral number 4. We'll talk a little bit about the Mediterranean and the Eastern Front. The Axis forces attacked North Africa. So this really was a world war. It was going on in China, Japan, in Southeast Asia, as you'll learn later with the United States versus Japan. You've got the attack on Hawaii. You've got, obviously, the European chapter. You've also got the campaigns in Africa. So really, Russia, you really have a total world war going on here in World War II. Now, Hitler focused attention on the Mediterranean and the Eastern Front. Italy was now attacking or moving troops in North Africa in September of 1940. Mussolini attacked the British-controlled land of Egypt. The big prize here was the Suez Canal, which connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea and then into the Indian Ocean. This was key to reaching the oil fields of the Middle East. The Italians had initially routed the British troops there, pushing them about 60 miles into Egypt. However, eventually, Britain struck back. The British finally found strength in December of 1940, and by February of 1941, they had swept the Italians about 500 miles across North Africa and had taken about 130,000 prisoners. Hitler stepped in and once again had to save Mussolini. The Italians did not fare very well in World War II. They really were a big failure. He had to send in one of his best generals and a large German tank force called the Afrika Korps. Erwin Rommel was the big general that was sent in. He commanded the Afrika Korps of tanks. Rommel had a lot of success in North Africa against the British, and he even earned himself the nickname the Desert Fox. Capital letter C talks about war in the Balkans. Hitler began planning to break the Non-Aggression Pact by attacking the Soviet Union as early as the summer of 1940. The Balkans were a key region for Hitler because he knew he would need to set up bases in those areas to then be able to attack Russia from the north and also the south. Hitler was able to persuade Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary to join the Axis powers. He had to conquer the countries of Yugoslavia and Greece. Capital letter D, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. This was known as Operation Barbarossa. It was Hitler's plan to invade the Soviets. The attack began as a surprise on June 22, 1941. Although Russia had the largest army in the world at the time, they were still untrained and not very well equipped. The Russians were being forced back, and they started to implement their famous technique of scorched earth policy or tactics as they retreated. Hitler laid siege to the cities of Leningrad and Moscow. When winter began to approach, the Germans were unprepared, much like Napoleon was, and this led to the loss of over 500,000 men, which is a eerily similar number to what Napoleon Bonaparte lost in his invasion of Russia. With the onset of winter and its impact, the Germans had lost all of their gains in Russia by 1943. Next, we'll take a look at the United States and what they were doing in the early parts of World War II. The United States began to break with their neutrality and isolation position. In 1939, due to the massive destruction caused on France and Great Britain, President Franklin Roosevelt asked the Congress to approve what was called the American Weapons or Lend-Lease Act, which was passed in 1941. This would allow the president to lend or lease arms and supplies to any country deemed vital to the success of the United States. There was also the Atlantic Charter, which was an agreement between the President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, which would uphold free trade among nations and also the right for people to choose their own government, henceforth democracy. United States Navy ships began to accompany Allied cargo ships. However, the German U-boats began to fire on United States ships in the Atlantic Ocean. The United States, because of these actions by the Germans, was now involved in an undeclared naval war with Hitler and the Nazis in Germany. That is the end of Section 1. We will pick up on Section 2 for our next lecture. Gentlemen, thank you.